There is so much more to do to secure Canada, to invest in Canada, to build Canada, to unite Canada.
The race is on. The long-awaited campaign will be quick, the results consequential. Tonight, from east to west, what this election means for you. I'm in St. John, New Brunswick.
And I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia, as the campaign officially kicks off.
We cannot afford another lost Liberal decade.
The political pitches.
Only New Democrats can be trusted to look out for you.
And pledges of patriotism.
Who is ready to stand up for Canada?
We can stand up to the Americans and put Canada first.
And the American wild card that could upend it all.
Donald, hands off Canada.
But Trump isn't the only issue for voters.
Healthcare, immigration.
Housing is a big issue.
What you want from this campaign tonight on a special edition of The National.
From CBC News, this is The National with Ian Hannah-Mansing in Vancouver and Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault in St. John, New Brunswick.
Tonight, the federal election campaign is underway. 37 days that will decide Canada's next government. Tonight, we have full coverage from here in the West, across the country to the East Coast.
I'm in St. John, New Brunswick, the Canadian city that will be hardest hit by those looming U.S. tariffs. It's already feeling the uncertainty, and it's not just here, it's across the country. Campaign kickoff rallies tonight full of energy with very clear messages that this choice is about Canada's economic and political survival. Our reporters are at those rallies from the major parties tonight. We'll be checking in with them throughout the evening, checking in with them as well as colleagues who are speaking with voters across the country. And of course, we have analysis from Ottawa.
And let's begin there with JP Tasker, who shows us the moment this high-stakes election, under pressure from the U.S., got started.
The trade war election is officially underway.
There is so much more to do to secure Canada, to invest in Canada, to build Canada.
After going to the Governor General to trigger the election, Liberal leader Mark Carney pointed to the tariffs and annexation threats coming from U.S. President Donald Trump as reasons why he needs a strong mandate.
President Trump claims that Canada isn't a real country. He wants to break us so America can own us. We will not let that happen.
The former central banker says he has the experience to steer the country through an economic crisis. He helped Canada manage the Great Recession, and he can do it again.
I know we need change. Big change. Positive change.
And he's leaning on some homegrown star power to get his patriotic message out.
Will there always be a Canada?
There will always be a Canada.
All right, elbows up.
Elbows up.
Carney's pledge comes as Trump says he's dead serious about annexation. The president is promising even more tariffs on April 2nd.
When I say they should be a state, I mean that.
Conservative leader Pierre says he won't bend to the U.S. administration, pointing out even Trump himself says he prefers to deal with a Liberal.
Our nation is more divided than ever before because the Liberal, radical, post-national, borderless, and globalist ideology has weakened our nation.
Poilievre says the Liberals don't deserve another term. It's time for change at the top.
It's the same old Liberal MPs, the same Liberal ministers, the same Liberal advisors, the same Liberal elites, the same broken Liberal promises of the last 10 years. We cannot afford another lost Liberal decade. We need to put Canada first for a change.
With the poll suggesting the NDP is in a distant third place, some progressives are parking their vote with the Liberals instead. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is urging them to stick with the party.
Only New Democrats can be trusted to look out for you.
This will be the shortest campaign allowed by law, just 37 days in total. Election day is April 28th, and polls suggest it's going to be a tight one. JP Tasker, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now, on this first day of official campaigning, our reporters are fanning out to cover the main party leaders and to keep you informed.
I'm Ashley Burke in St. John's, Newfoundland with the Liberals campaign. Mark Carney is riding high in the polls here in Atlantic Canada, but about 50 protesters tried to disrupt his first rally. Police asked them to move outside and lock the door. Carney acknowledged them off the top of his speech and said he's here to listen. Then he tried to position himself as the best option to take on Donald Trump, and he got a big round of applause here when he tried to liken Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre to the U.S. president. But one of the biggest challenges Carney faces is differentiating himself from the Trudeau government. Carney said the proof that he's different is in the action that he's taken since becoming prime minister just over a week ago. And he has now proposed a 1% cut to the lowest tax bracket, saying it would put $825 back in the pockets of those families.
I'm Kate McKenna covering the Conservatives, and I'm at a rally in North York where they're actually turning people away because so many people came. It's unclear how many people are here in total, but it's well over 1,000. More than 200 were turned away. Some were given T-shirts. And this is in the Toronto area, which is a Liberal hub of support. Now, this is the momentum that Conservatives are hoping to get after dipping slightly in the polls, and it's momentum that they're hoping to continue to have throughout the weeks ahead.
I'm Rafi Vujikanian in Montreal with the Bloc Québécois, where leader Yves-François Blanchet has just met with comedians at this awards gala. But his party's electoral fortunes are no laughing matter. With Justin Trudeau's resignation, the Bloc has lost its lead in Quebec to the Liberals. Blanchet says he'll address the U.S. trade war by focusing on specific economic threats to Quebecers, such as those employed in the dairy or aluminum sectors. He'll also talk up how Quebecers do not accept pipelines, even as Conservatives and Liberals speak of national energy corridors. One clear advantage for Blanchet over Mark Carney is his fluency in French, very important in French language debates, though this year there may only be one of those.
I'm Marina von Stackelberg in Montreal with the NDP campaign, where leader Jagmeet Singh is entering his third election as the longest-serving party leader. So how does he show voters he's offering them something different? The slogan for this campaign is one they've used before, "In it for you." Singh says the New Democrats will protect and fight for everyday people impacted by Donald Trump's tariffs, but they could be in for their own battle. Recent polling suggests the New Democrats could be at risk of losing many of their seats. Conservatives have been targeting working-class voters, and progressives may be returning to the Liberals. Still, the NDP say they have more money raised and are better prepared than they have been in a decade. And Singh is a seasoned campaigner.
So let's turn to our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton. So, Rosie, what struck you about the campaign launches on day one?
Adrian, let's start with the two parties who have the best chance of forming government. The Liberal leader, Mark Carney, is going to talk a lot about action over this campaign. The action he can point to so far is what he did over his first 9 days as Prime Minister. If his biggest challenge is to demonstrate change under the same Liberal banner, he's already got examples of substantive changes, killing the carbon tax and the capital gains inclusion rate. He also dropped a major policy on day one, that broad-based middle-class tax cut. That was unusual and bold. It also puts a squeeze on Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who has promised his own tax cut to come. Poilievre tried really hard to frame the campaign about what he's wanted it to be about for so long, the cost of living and change. So he talked about that lost Liberal decade, how in the face of Donald Trump, Canadians can't afford another Liberal mandate. But a lot of Poilievre's solutions are the same as what he was offering before Trump. So he has to convince Canadians this is about those Conservative brand solutions rather than just a question of leadership, which would be a harder fight for Poilievre.
Then when you think about the NDP and the Bloc, what do you make of their start?
So both of them really, Adrian, trying to get into the conversation, both struggling in the polls. Jagmeet Singh didn't really offer much policy solutions, but he's trying to say that he's the defender of working Canadians and make this a conversation about class. And Bloc leader Yves-François Blanchet suggesting that no one could defend Quebec better than him when it comes to the threats of the U.S. president. But it is harder for parties that have not or cannot form government when the stakes are so high. So we'll see how those messages adapt over the course of the election.
All right. Thanks, Rosie. And Rosie will be back for a special Sunday edition of At Issue. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea on what you should be watching for. That's in about 20 minutes. Now, the Green Party launched its campaign this morning in Montreal. Its two co-leaders reaffirming their commitment to protecting the planet.
The only party that will be standing firm on real climate action is Greens, because we don't make up our mind by checking the wins of popular views and polls.
Elizabeth May and Jonathan Pedneau officially became co-leaders earlier this year, but the party says Pedneau will take on a more singular leadership role during the campaign and will represent the Greens in the debates. Now, in Quebec, the political landscape appears to be shifting. New polls show the Liberals gaining ground after Justin Trudeau's resignation. Vanessa Lee spoke with voters there.
As Quebecers tap into a time-honored tradition, David Lessard is showing his true colors.
I always have been a Canadian first. I'm a Quebecer, but I'm first a Canadian.
Lessard is a fifth-generation maple syrup producer from Saint-Joseph-des-Érables, southeast of Quebec City. He wants the next prime minister to stand up for Canada.
To defend our identity and our tradition.
There has been a surge in patriotism here over the past few weeks. A recent poll found the percentage of Canadians saying they have a deep emotional attachment to the nation shot up the most in Quebec.
The reaction, again, to what happened with south of the border with the Trump administration matters a lot to Quebecers, because we know we sell aluminum, we have lumber.
With 78 seats up for grabs, Quebec is once again shaping up to be a key battleground.
Mr. Trudeau had poor numbers in Quebec, so you remove him from the equation, it helps the Liberals.
Current projections have the Liberals in the lead over the Bloc Québécois, with the Conservatives in third place.
I read Newton. What goes up goes down. If that's good for me, that's good for Mr. Carney. Let's see.
Support for Quebec separatism has declined dramatically, but the annexation threat puts its linguistic and cultural survival at stake.
Everybody in Quebec knows that in Canada, they have a very specific place, a protected place, official languages, Charter of Rights, constitutional guarantees. Mr. Trump just signed an executive order which said English is the only official language in the United States.
With Quebec voters known to be unpredictable when it comes to federal politics, the path to victory for any party won't be easy. Vanessa Lee, CBC News, Montreal.
In Western Canada, tariffs loom large over this campaign, especially for industries that rely on exports like agriculture and energy. And as Sam Sampson reports, there are new questions tonight about an appeal to pause those tariffs.
The prairies are the agricultural driver of Canada, but potential U.S. tariffs and existing Chinese tariffs are already impacting sales and prices. So hopes are high Canada's next leader will stand up for the farming community.
I think this time around it's going to be more polarized, because I feel like the West feels like it hasn't been heard for a long time.
Some farmers hope Ottawa will focus less on environmental policies and more on building better railway and port infrastructure so they can sell to global markets. A sentiment also heard in the Conservative stronghold of Alberta, where crude oil is king and continues to be Canada's biggest export.
This federal election is going to shape the oil and gas industry.
Crane operator J.C. McIsaac says he wants to see the next government find a balance between green energy and ensuring a future for oil and gas, because families like his rely on that work.
I've said my whole life that the environment is a real thing and it needs to be protected. But environmentalism, to some degree, is the luxury of the wealthy. And people first need to put food on the table.
But when it comes to picking Canada's next leader, there are some uniting themes.
Getting a prime minister in that takes care of our kids.
I also would like our leader to be able to collaborate across parties, across provinces.
Could be a big ask, given the political climate. Before Mark Carney won the Liberal leadership, in an interview with right-wing media outlet Breitbart, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith reiterated her support for Pierre Poilievre and noted that since the U.S. tariff threats, support for the federal Liberals has increased.
So that's what I fear, is that the longer this dispute goes on, politicians posture, and it seems to be benefiting the Liberals right now. So I would hope that we could put things on pause. This is what I've told administration officials. Let's just put things on pause so we can get through an election.
Well, my response is that the president has said that he thinks it would be easier to deal with a Liberal. and with good reason. The Liberals have weakened our country.
With respect to the Premier's comments, I take note of her alignment of Mr. Poilievre with Mr. Trump.
And Sam, have we heard from Alberta's Premier on this?
Yes, we have. Her office told us that any suggestion the Premier has asked the U.S. to interfere in Canada's election is offensive and false. In a separate statement, the Premier said she has repeatedly asked U.S. officials to hold off on tariffs until a proper renegotiation of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement can happen after our federal election.
Sam Sampson in Edmonton tonight. The tariff threat also top of mind for many voters here in British Columbia, but of course, that's not the only issue. We know suburban areas around major cities like Vancouver could determine Canada's next government. So I headed to Burnaby, just east of here, to ask some residents what matters most to them. What's the big issue for you in the election campaign?
Maybe healthcare, and immigration, and security. Those three.
Have you made up your mind who you're going to vote for?
Well, I mean, it's everything in my mind, but of course, things will change. But it doesn't matter sometimes, you know. If politics is politics, right?
What do you hope for in this election campaign?
Hope for? I hope that there's just a party that presents itself that kind of care for the citizens and kind of putting us first. Like, we're in a pretty difficult situation in the world, just with costs continually rising, and I want someone to present themselves as caring.
I'm very concerned about the tariff tax that's imposed by Trump, and we're so affected.
And is that, to you, the big issue right now?
Yeah, and also the prices of the commodities.
Honestly, I'm looking for someone I can believe in this time. There's been lots of promises in the past, not a lot of follow through, and it's just going to be a matter of who convinces me that we're going to see results this time.
Yeah, so how do you make that assessment? How do you make that decision?
That's the question. Honestly, I've been struggling with that while listening to the various leaders and listening to their platforms and what matters to them.
This is the first time you're eligible to vote in a federal election. But you don't think you're going to. Why not?
I just don't feel like I need to. Like, it's either the Conservatives win or basically the Liberals win again, right?
So are you actually an undecided voter?
Yeah, undecided.
Leaning one way or the other?
No, I don't really have a big opinion on it.
Okay, so this is fascinating because a lot of time and effort is going to be spent by the parties to get your vote, to get your attention. So what do they have to do to win your vote?
I'm not sure. I think, with tackling issues that are ongoing, I think housing is a big issue happening. I think, the costs of everything is kind of rising.
Yeah.
So
what does somebody need to do to win your vote?
Tell the truth.
Yeah. And do you think you're going to get that?
No. Is as extinct as the dodo bird in today's world, which is a big disappointment.
And so if you had a message for the political leaders who might be watching, what would you say to them?
Actions speak louder than words.
And by that you mean?
They need to do things, not just talk and talk and talk and talk.
And this is just the beginning. A lot can change in the 37 days of the campaign. But here's where things stand as of now on the CBC poll tracker. The Liberals and Conservatives are now almost exactly tied in the polls, each with 37% of the vote. The New Democrats well behind at 11%, then the Bloc and Greens. But almost as important as the now is the trend. After years of Conservative dominance, in January, Justin Trudeau resigned. Trump became president, and the Liberals surged, gobbling up support from both the Conservatives and the NDP. A dramatic shift, and it may not be the last. That CBC poll tracker is an aggregator of trusted Canadian polls. One of them is from the Angus Reid Institute, and Shachi Kurl is the president of that organization. So, Shachi, after that sudden shift that we saw with the Liberal surge, should we expect more volatility ahead?
I mean, a big part of this comes down to how solid and locked in is that vote, Ian. And I can tell you that where the Conservatives have started to really see some losses, they're losing voters. Among the voters that they still have and are hanging on to, those folks are solid voters for the Conservatives. They're not going anywhere else. At least about 3/4 of them aren't. And so that's key. That's really important. Conversely, though, for those newly converted Liberals, when you ask them, how committed are you to this party that you're choosing or leaning towards? Only about half of them say they're fully locked in. So watch for this to keep moving in different directions, or to see those Liberals lock in and convert. And if that happens, my goodness, look out.
When we were on cross-country checkup earlier today and one went to Burnaby to speak to voters there, I heard about the economy being a key concern, from tariffs to affordability. Beyond that, are there any issues that you see coming up in the polls that could turn this election?
I think we've already seen the big election turn issue already baked into this campaign, and it's the Trump factor. It's sovereignty, it's annexation, it's tariffs, and that has reframed the ballot question. Remember, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives spent, the better part of 2 years really taking it to the Liberals, reminding Canadians why they were so ticked off at Justin Trudeau and so ticked off at the governing party. All of a sudden, it's almost as though in some ways that's become retrospective, and Canadians, at least right now on day one anyway, are focused on what's in front of them, and what's in front of them is who is best to deal with Trump. Now, you've already seen Pierre Poilievre also start to pivot. He revealed a new campaign slogan today, which, incorporated the whole fight message, but also the change message. We'll see if that resonates, and frankly, if there's enough time in a really tight 5-week campaign. And when you factor in advance voting, Ian, it's even shorter than that. So he doesn't have a lot of time to change minds, but clearly we're going to see the attempt from the Conservatives, who were so quiet for the better part of 8 to 10 weeks, now starting to come out with a message that sort of meets Canadian anger and energy where they're at.
Big province here in British Columbia. You have 30 seconds to tell me how things are looking, because all of the major parties have had some level of success in BC in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is no deliverance for any political party unless they can deliver in BC. I mean, it comes down to that. About 2 months ago, we saw the Conservatives solidly ahead, including in the vote-rich suburbs around the city of Vancouver here, sitting at more than 50% of the vote were the Conservatives. Today, they're neck and neck in a dogfight with the Liberals, and the biggest loser in all of that has been the federal NDP, who are seeing their vote really just stampede over to the Liberals, and that's a concern for them.
All right, Shachi, always nice hearing your analysis. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian.
While this election campaign is just hours old, the American president's influence is already clear.
Feels like we're in a movie right now because it feels very unreal.
Tariffs, threats to our sovereignty, and general uncertainty. How Trump has changed the race to become prime minister. Plus, how major party leaders are trying to reach voters.
It's all invoking this idea that this is Team Canada.
The strategies that are already at play. And a new warning for Canadians traveling to the U.S.
You'd be amazed at the exodus of people who are saying, I'm going home now.
We're back in 2.
We can't let the situation in the South divide us right now. There's just not any place for that kind of rhetoric in Canada.
The tariffs are kind of overtaking everything at the moment, and those are first priority.
Donald Trump's relentless threats are clearly top of mind for some concerned Canadians as they contemplate which party to vote for. And this campaign comes at a time when Canada's relationship with the U.S. is poised to become even more difficult. Katie Simpson joins us from Washington now. So, Katie, I guess we're a little over a week away from even more tariffs.
It's expected to be another blow to the Canadian economy. Reciprocal tariffs targeting all U.S. trading partners, including Canada, set for April 2nd. It could be a moment of vulnerability. In the past, when Canada's faced a Trump trade threat, the Trudeau government gathered a senior team, threw all of them at it. That was the case for NAFTA negotiations and the recent tariff threats. But this moment is different. The Canadian government is in caretaker mode, and there are no signs the Trump administration cares.
Yeah, Katie, and now there are questions about Alberta Premier Danielle Smith apparently asking the Trump administration to pause tariffs for the Canadian election, noting the Liberal turnaround in the polls.
Those comments to an American right-wing media outlet 2 weeks ago will prompt scrutiny should Trump or anyone else in his administration weigh in further. Trump distanced himself last week from the Conservatives, saying he'd rather work with a Liberal.
And of course, I think we're all going to be watching to see if the president has anything else to say as he also continues his push for expansionism.
Yeah, and now he's making comparisons between Canada and Ukraine. When complaining about Canada and trade negotiations, he used the expression, "some people don't have the cards," which is what he said to the Ukrainian president in that tense Oval Office meeting. Now, Trump does not seem to be making a joke, and he's not doing it to needle Justin Trudeau because, of course, Trudeau is now gone. This week, keep an eye on Trump and Greenland. After declaring the U.S. must take control of the Danish territory, Trump is sending a high-level delegation there, including the National Security Advisor and the Second Lady. If Trump is seen to be aggressively pursuing an expansionist agenda, it's only going to make people more concerned in Canada.
Yeah, so interesting. All right, Katie Simpson in Washington tonight. Thanks, Katie.
Trade isn't the only source of cross-border friction. There are new rules for people who plan to enter the U.S., especially for a lengthy stay. Some travelers are reporting trouble at the border. And as Jennifer Yoon explained, some Canadian snowbirds are cutting their trips short.
A new warning from the Canadian government to those visiting the U.S. for more than a month. Register with the American government, or you could face penalties, fines, even prosecution.
You'd be amazed at the exodus of people who are saying, I'm going home now.
The Canadians getting hit the hardest, snowbirds like Joan McAlpine Stiles, who has wintered in Florida for the past 12 years.
There's so much uncertainty of what's going to happen, and that's what has people concerned. You don't know from one day to the next what new rule will come into place.
Also causing concern are news reports of a BC woman being detained for more than a week after trying to cross from Mexico, and a French scientist who was denied entry, according to the French government, because his phone contained messages critical of the Trump administration, though the U.S. denies that was the reason.
They're frustrated, they're anxious, they're upset, and they're feeling unwelcomed.
The Canadian Association of Retired Persons says it's been inundated with messages from concerned members living stateside.
If the relationship continues as cold as it is, I suspect we will see the majority of Canadians changing their plans for next year.
Usually, Canadians are exempt from rules like this. Now, they're only exempt from being fingerprinted.
It just seems like an assault on an otherwise friendly relationship.
This American lawyer says the move doesn't make sense. She doesn't think Canadian seniors are threatening the U.S. immigration system.
This population, Canadians staying in the U.S. for 30 days or more, normally own homes in the U.S. They pay taxes, they contribute to the economy, they're law-abiding. These are all good things. These are all things that we want.
Her message to Canadians, the registration rule is here to stay, and those who want to remain in the U.S. should comply before the April 11th deadline. Jennifer Yoon, CBC News, Toronto.
Major party leaders are racing to reach voters, but they're doing so in very different ways.
You live in the States.
Yeah, but I'll always be Canadian.
Carney gets a celebrity endorsement, Singh gets personal, Poilievre gets some help from his wife. How those methods are resonating with voters. But first, Rosie's here with a special edition of At Issue.
Hey, Adrian, tonight it's all about the election. Federal leaders are already out giving their pitch for why they are the best answer to deal with Donald Trump. Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about the official launch of the campaign and what we can expect over the next 36 days. At Issue tonight, the election campaign begins. Leaders are hitting the road and pitching Canadians on why they're the best choice to respond to the threats from Donald Trump.
We've done a lot in the 9 days to put in place many of the foundations. But what's important is that the government has a mandate from the Canadian people.
Liberals have replaced Justin Trudeau with his economic advisor and hand-picked successor, Mark Carney. But a Liberal is a Liberal is a Liberal.
Only New Democrats will fight to make sure you don't pay the price when things get harder.
The Green Team has what it takes to make Canada rise and resist and face the future with open arms.
I read Newton. What goes up goes down. If that's good for me, that's good for Mr. Carney.
So what's at stake for the parties in this election, and how will the Trump factor affect this race? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to discuss the start of Canada's federal election. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Yes, I am legitimately this excited. I do love an election. Chantal, this is something Pierre Poilievre and other opposition parties wanted. This is the election they've wanted. Give me your sense of what you heard from, we'll start with Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre earlier today.
Mr. Carney has been prime minister for less than 10 days, and he has already managed to move enough goalposts from the previous mandate that he could claim at least to be running on a record that has nothing to do with Justin Trudeau. But that was somehow almost magic. I also noted that he asked for a strong mandate, which in our language means asking for a majority mandate. Who would have thought that an outgoing Liberal Prime Minister this year would be asking for a majority mandate? I also noted that Pierre Poilievre did not go into that. And you were talking about the Trump effect. I looking from the outside, seeing it, I wasn't on site. It seemed to me that for someone who's been asking for an election for a year and a half, Pierre Poilievre's opening statement kind of lacked energy. But if you want to talk about the Trump factor, the fact that with 5 of the 6 questions that were put to the Conservative leader dealt with Donald Trump, it probably didn't help. That Alberta Premier Danielle Smith kind of set up Pierre Poilievre with an interview to a pro-Trump network in the U.S., where she basically argued that he was a lot closer to Donald Trump's view of the new America than the Liberals, and that they should want him to become Prime Minister.
Yeah, I would imagine there was a phone call placed to her office asking her to cease and desist after that. Andrew, what did you make of the top 2 contenders there, Mr. Carney and Mr. Poilievre, how they started this campaign off?
Yeah, well, it's certainly Carney, and the Liberals are going to be all Trump all the time, that Donald Trump represents a threat to the country's existence. I think he said that the Americans want to own us, and they're going to be trying to tie Poilievre as much as they can to Trump. Unfortunately, as Chantal mentioned, some ammunition has been provided not just by Mr. Carney, Mr. Poilievre himself over the weeks prior to this, but also by Danielle Smith. The Conservatives will be trying to, on the same time, to say, look, there's a whole Liberal record here that Mark Carney can try to run away from, but on the economy, on affordability, on housing, et cetera, that is, and if they can't absolutely tie things back to that, they can at least try to say, look, yeah, Trump's a threat, but the Liberals have left us weakened. They have militarily or economically or what have you, and to bridge that gap that way. If I can boil it down, is the Conservatives are going to try and claim that Carney is too close to Justin Trudeau. The Liberals are going to try and say that Poilievre is too close to Trump. The trouble for the Conservatives is Justin Trudeau is no longer with us politically, and Donald Trump very much is.
Yeah. I did think that Mr. Poilievre talked more about change than he has in a while, Althea, trying to, again, hit home that classic election message that Canadians, when Canadians want change, they want change, and there's no force greater than that. But give me your take about what you heard from the 2 of them.
Well, I mean, he put change in the slogan on the podium for the first time, Canada First for a Change. I think both leaders spoke to the Trump question and to the change question. I mean, Mr. Carney talked about all the ways in which he has been different than Justin Trudeau in his first 9 days as Prime Minister, all the steps that he has taken, whether that's the consumer price on carbon or the reversal on capital gains, or the movements with the premiers, for example. I don't think it's quite settled yet what the ballot question will be. Will the ballot question be about who is the stronger leader to deal with Donald Trump? And on that question, polls suggest Mark Carney wins by a landslide. Or is the appetite for change still going to be a driver for lots of voters at the polls? And Mr. Poilievre has determined that he wins on the change, and he is diving deep down on the change while also trying to address a vulnerability on the Trump front. And Mr. Carney is deep down on the who can handle Trump, but also acknowledging that he has a vulnerability on the change front and trying to address that. So I think we're kind of going to see those two narratives compete with one another in the next 36 days.
Yeah, I mean that's fascinating. The idea that they're both presenting as change, Chantal, and I wonder if it's possible for Mark Carney to do that even under that Liberal banner and with all those same Liberals around him. But man, he has done things differently over the past 9 days than Justin Trudeau. That's for sure.
Yes, but I'm going to sidestep your question to ask myself, and the next few weeks will tell us that whether change is as attractive to voters as it was 2 months ago versus stability.
Right.
And on that score, there is a card for Mark Carney to play because he kind of represents change with a team that is familiar to Canadians.
I see.
And I am not convinced that the voters who have flocked to the Liberals are conservative. They mostly tend to come from the NDP and the Bloc Québécois. So actually, if Mr. Poilievre wants to win this election, he has to hope that the NDP and the Bloc do well.
Yeah.
And that they bring their voters home, because basically a lot of what has happened has been other voters, non-conservatives, saying, yes, we'd rather go to Mark Carney to block Pierre Poilievre than to stick with our parties.
So from what we heard of Jagmeet Singh and Yves-François Blanchet today, Andrew, do you see that happening? Jagmeet Singh's message really seemed to be about class and him standing up for Canadian workers as opposed to Donald Trump in particular.
I think that was the NDP leader trying to save the furniture. The NDP are in a lot of trouble, I think, in this election. Because there's such a crisis atmosphere, I think there'll be a real tendency for things to polarize between the Conservatives and the Liberals, and that doesn't leave a lot of room. It's always the age-old Liberal message to NDP voters: you can't vote NDP, you have to vote Liberals to stop the Tories. Now there's an extra edge of it: you have to vote Liberal to stop Donald Trump. And the more that they can demonize Poilievre as being either not able to stand up to Trump or too beholden to his base, some portion of which actually likes Donald Trump, or certainly the ones who are leaking into the People's Party. And I think there's some truth in that. Poilievre has been noticeably slow to get into this match, to get it to line up against Donald Trump. He has eventually, but he kind of, I think, let some crucial initiatives slip. I think it would have been much smarter for him to really have taken the initiative and kind of broke with Trump in a very visible way and take the risk of losing some support to the PPC, because otherwise he looks a bit weak as a result.
What do you think about Jagmeet Singh and Yves-François Blanchet's launch today, Althea?
Well, I mean, where the party leaders go kind of tells a story that they want us to tell Canadians. Right, like the Conservative leader is going to the GTA. That's a place where a majority can be had. The Liberals are going to Newfoundland because they want to, bring up the message that this is where the blue wave started. This is where the red wave seems to be starting. They're going to paint the country red. The NDP Jagmeet Singh launched in Ottawa and then went to Montreal to basically save the furniture in Alexandre Boulris's riding, a riding that should be a really easy win for them. They're trying to convince us that they can get Stephen Guilbeault's riding. This is the Quebec lieutenant, the former environment minister, who was so popular they made him the Quebec lieutenant. There's like no way they're going to win Stephen Guilbeault's riding. So why are they even pretending that is in play? It's almost like when Jagmeet Singh says he's running to be prime minister, why not just be authentic with Canadians and say, you're running to be the best opposition that they can possibly be. They're going to try to get as much as they can from either a Liberal government or a Conservative government, and that is what their end goal is, and this is their record.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm not sitting in the NDP brain trust, but I find this perplexing. Tell us a story that makes sense.
Yeah. Last minute to you, Chantal, on the NDP and the Bloc.
I read that stuff in Montreal as in another way. I don't believe we will see much of Mr. Singh in Montreal, and that's probably good news for the only MP that the NDP has in Quebec, because Mr. Singh does not bring votes to Alexandre Boulris. He will win on his own. But I think, bottom line, despite the I want to be prime minister speak, they're going to do what the Ontario NDP did. Focus on the ridings where they can save the furniture. Right. And increasingly, that is what you're going to see.
Okay, got to leave it there, but it's just the kickoff day. We're going to see you often. Not every night, I promise, but often. Thank you all for the kickoff. And with that, I'll send things back to Ian, and he, of course, is in Vancouver.
Next, how major party leaders are trying to engage voters.
We believe they can bring in the first-time voters into their fold.
The different strategies and how they're resonating.
What's important to you in this federal election?
I do think that the biggest thing we have to deal with is the United States.
Our relationship with America.
The border wars.
Largely economics.
Donald Trump still continues to threaten to take Canada.
I'm concerned about housing, the cost of living, struggling to put food on the table.
Canada's economic future. There's a huge fallout in consumer confidence. We put ourselves in a big hole. We're falling behind internationally. That's really concerning.
A snapshot of voters in Alberta, and like every other province, dealing with Trump and fixing the economy are key priorities. When it comes to reaching those voters, Canada's major party leaders are using different tactics. Yvette Bren now with what they're each doing and how some Canadians are responding.
Mike Myers, what are you doing here?
In less than 24 hours, about 10 million people watched Mark Carney's newest ad, which featured a big assist from Mike Myers.
What are the two seasons in Toronto?
Winter and construction.
Wow. You really are Canadian.
The use of the Canadian celebrity seemingly part of the Liberal leader's strategy.
It's all invoking this idea that this is Team Canada.
As to whether it's hitting, those reviews are mixed.
Well, it's not genuine. I mean, it's important to me, but it's not genuine.
But Carney's not alone with his patriotic appeal.
So when Pierre says, it doesn't matter who you know or where you're from.
Pierre Poilievre has used Canada First as a rallying cry while also trying to highlight his family, his wife, the voice behind some of his ads.
His children know him in Francais, Espanol, and English as Papa.
So introducing himself and his family is a kind of a first family vibe, if you like, to show that this is a family like any other that has the same kind of concerns as Canadians.
Of course it's a tactic. It's not a bad one, obviously.
I worked for minimum wage to take care of my family when my dad was sick.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is also trying to deliver a personal touch.
I retie my turban at least once a day just to get
getting in on a hot TikTok trend. In what's known as a Get Ready With Me video, Singh is hoping to grab the attention of young people. Already it's had more than 4 million views.
They believe they can bring in the first-time voters into their fold, which is going to help that party grow.
But it's not enough to capture this potential voter.
It's embarrassed to say I never participated in an election, even though I hear sometimes they knock on my door.
While the campaign is only just beginning, in this short race, parties will have to get creative to find new ways to meet busy Canadians where they're at, even if that differs from person to person. Yvette Bren, CBC News, Vancouver.
Next, a final thought from voters here in St. John.
Oh, goodness!
Probably not something that could go on CBC, actually.
We'll introduce you to the national envelope and the questions we'll be asking voters across the country. This election is about you, and we want to hear your thoughts throughout this campaign, not just about the leaders or the parties, but about the issues that matter to you the most. And we'll be doing that in a whole bunch of ways, including with this little envelope, which I'll be taking across the country over the next 36 days. Inside is a question many of you won't see coming. The question will change for every city we visit. Here's a preview of just how this moment interaction went today in St. John.
If you were sitting across a table from Donald Trump right now, what would you say to him?
Oh, goodness!
Probably not something that could go on CBC, actually.
My message to Donald Trump is, are you nuts? How much time do I have?
I would say that he's way too hard on Canadians right now and he needs to chill.
Donald, hands off Canada. We're not the 51st state.
I plead the fifth? I don't know. That's a bit of a loaded question right there.
Okay, so many responses to some good envelope questions. You're going to hear from Kayla Hounsell tomorrow explaining why this city is so vulnerable to tariffs. I'll be sitting with a group of New Brunswickers about what they need. And we're going to go across the country to places that don't get a lot of time in the national spotlight. Ottawa is where the focus of the political conversation is, but an election is about Canadians. And so that's where you'll see us in Medicine Hat and Yellowknife all across the country.
I love that envelope concept. I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm trying to figure out how can we possibly work that into cross-country checkup. We had a great conversation today on the program, hearing from people across the country, election themed, of course, and we'll continue to do that as well over the next 4 weeks. So lots of voices from lots of Canadians, Adrian, over that time.
Good, as it should be. Thanks to all of you for being with us. I'm Adrian Arsenault in St. John.
And I'm Ian Hannamansing in Vancouver. You can watch us anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app. And of course, subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. From both Adrian and I, good night.